Welcome back to Ask GMBN Tech. This is where we answer your questions you've submitted using the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech underneath the videos. We pick them out and look to answer a few of those every week. What is the first one today, Owen?
First question is, what's the best way to remove a tough tyre using a tyre lever? Sometimes I really struggle to unseat the tyre and have slipped and skinned my knuckles, which is something he'd love to avoid. I mean, that's a sensible thing.
Don't we all? I have encountered similar problems with this, and I've got weak, puny hands now. I've injured my fingers too many times. So I started kind of flipping my hand around and doing it backwards. I can show you guys in a sec. We'll get a tyre and some tyre levers and show you a technique that I built up in bike shops a couple of years ago. So the first thing, before I get onto tyre levers, is just to de-seat the bead of the tyre from the rim all the way around and try and get that bead right down in the centre of the rim bed, and that makes it like as loose and slack as possible and facilitates you actually getting it off. So I'm just going to do that first. Now that's off all the way around, so you've got as much play as possible. The first bit is the same as ever. We're just going to try and work that tyre lever in and stick it like that. And then the key bit that I wanted to show you guys today is instead of going like this with your hand, your knuckles facing the spokes, put your hand like that with it out, push it round like that. And then if you do slip or anything, your hand is going like that away from the wheel and you can get more drive in your arm. This tyre is not the tightest, so it's sort of, you could do it in any way, but one that really stiff, like wire beads, commuting tyres, stuff like that, it's helped me a lot, just to flip your arm around like that and push away from yourself. The next question today is from @ConfusionCoventry, who says, what is the easiest way to measure sag on a coil shock? Because I've had this as well, this is actually quite annoying sometimes, because it's not as simple as with an air shock. You've got a nice clear demarcation with a rubber band on the can, and just a little bit of math, you convert the stroke length, work that out, measure your sag. What would you say on coil?
Yeah, I mean, it's the process is more challenging, but you've still got to do that maths of what your stroke rate is in terms of how much the actual shock moves compared to how much rear travel there actually is. So you still need to do that bit. And there is no easy way, and it is quite tricky. But I think the best way is looking at the eye to eye of the shock, getting a tape measure, measuring it, and then getting a pal to measure it again when you're sat on the bike with all your riding equipment that you'll wear. So if you're wearing a helmet, make sure you add that in as well, because sometimes they're relatively heavy. So I think that's probably the easiest way. I mean, you might be able to use the bottom out bumper as just a rough guide.
Okay, by sliding it up.
Sliding it up and kind of like, trying to hold it. But again, it's really tricky because you've got the spring in there, depending on how tightly wound that coil is. Obviously, it gets tighter as it's compressed as well. So, a bit of finger trap, but I think the best technique is with a pal and a tape measure, and then that same maths that you would do to work out the overall sag that you would do on an air shock. Another question here, this one's from Kendrick Lamar, very good name. Can not bedding in brake pads when you first put them in cause extra wear?
Yes, I think. I've definitely had it happen to me, like changing pads at a race, didn't take the time to bed them in properly, and then you just rinse them, and it's a silly thing to do. And I think why that is so we've spoken before on the channel about the importance of bedding in and how that uses adherent friction. So once you have pad material on the rotors, the molecules of the pad material on the pad and on the rotor stick to each other as you brake. And then there's the abrasive friction, where it's just causing breakdown of the pad itself and the rotor minimally because it's a bit stronger. And that braking tends to be less consistent, less grabby, wears out stuff faster. So if you haven't taken the time to bed stuff in properly, and then you're going to ride stuff where it's maybe causing a lot of maybe really wet rides, gritty, where you're not able to heat your brakes up, but they are being used a lot, it will just tear all that pad material off using the abrasive braking. And then you wear everything out in the ride, which happened to me at Nationals this year. So it actually is really important, as well as the performance aspect. It's a longevity issue as well to bed your brakes in. Next question is from Antman2389, who says, can you use non-flat top 12-speed chains across different manufacturers' drivetrains? So I think, if not, why not? So I guess what he's asking is, could you use a Shimano chain on a SRAM cassette, or a vice versa, or other brands are available, and why might you get different issues?
Well, it's a little bit complicated, but we'll try and keep it kind of like top line. Essentially, lots of the brands, 11-speed was a golden era where lots of components from different brands would work together, and it was quite fun. Obviously, the big caveat is that if you're using Shimano parts, Shimano recommend that you use a Shimano chine.
As they would, I suppose,
as they would do. And likewise with SRAM.
Yeah.
And in this 11-speed, ye olde era, lots of people have gone to 12-speed, you could work with different bits and bobs, and you could maybe use like a Connex Whipperman chain, and it would work almost as well as a Shimano, and it might work on SRAM as well. Now it's a lot more sort of complicated and nuanced as well. So because each brand wants to optimise how the shifter works and how quickly that the derailleur can push the chain up the cassette and drop it down, they've worked really hard on changing very, very small details on the chain, so you could, whereby the inner chamfered edges and the subtle changes mean that they're optimised for the brands.
Is that the inner edges of the
inner
chain
edges
links?
And like the inner plate effectively on some as well. So it's there's lots going on. With Shimano, with some of their HG Plus stuff is only designed to work with their components.
And that's to do with the way that it grips the teeth during the shift, right? You sort of reduce the time that the chain isn't driving sprockets because it kind of flexes across them. Yeah. That's what I believe.
I think you're right. And I think, and then with SRAM, there is a difference in the width, the inner width. Okay, it's like 0.0 of a mil. So
I guess
there is a difference.
It's going to be within tolerances of functioning to get you home then, but it's
within getting you home, definitely.
You might not notice, but then it will be more noisy, less efficient, cause more wear. And it's that kind of longevity factor that you should be concerned about. But it's interesting, you specify flat top in the question. What are the differences with a flat top SRAM chain then that means it's totally different? And non-compatible.
So flat top is what's being used now on the T-type. It's been used on the road before. It's not the same, but there's similarities in terms of the road version, the mountain bike version. Essentially, the chain has a flat top, so it doesn't have the kind of classic chain shape. And also they've done that to reinforce it and make it stiffer. But what they've also done is make the rollers slightly different, and thus, because the rollers are different, that means that the link is effectively a sort of different size.
Yeah.
So when it's kind of fitting onto the teeth, those gaps between the teeth are slightly different. So it won't unfortunately work, and you won't be able to use a non-flat top chain on it. So it's problematic because some of the flat top chains are not cheap.
No, they aren't.
Definitely keep on top of your degreasing and re-greasing and keeping your chain really clean to try and make that chain last as long as possible.
Does that mean that, because what I understand is the pitch is the same as well, but does that mean that an old school chain checker wouldn't work on a flat top chain?
Unfortunately, that's right. At the moment, there's, I think, new ones coming out from Park and other brands as well that will work, but some of the older, a bit like older chain tools, won't work with certain chains. So it's a similar thing there. So some older chain checkers won't work because that gap distance that you're measuring isn't the same. So it gets complicated. Complicated quite quickly.
No,
when
thank
it's
you
just
for that
a simple
question,
chain.
because it's brought out a lot. There's lots of different nuances to talk about, so that's what we like. So but I hope that's helped.
Cool. We've got a question here from Sender Dave. Hopefully Dave is still sending. What is meant by the modulation of brakes, and how is it controlled?
Oh, how is it controlled? That's down to, we'll get into that in a sec. Modulation is thinking about usable power, I suppose, or being able to expand the range of between having the brakes on a little bit and locking up.
Okay,
which you should be able to do on all brakes as long as they're kind of correctly set up, bled. And that's to do with how the amount of force that you deliver with your fingers is delivered to the brake, and how that changes through the sort of stroke of it, because some brakes can be very on-off, which we describe as not having much modulation, and then other brakes, depending on sort of how far you are into braking, the leverage ratio in the mechanics and how that works in the brake will change how much braking force is applied. So it gives you a little bit more, you don't have to do as much feathering with your hands, I suppose. You can kind of just brake, and the harder you brake, the harder it'll get.
Okay.
So then it gives you that little bit more control and not locking up as suddenly. And there's definitely, you can adapt and learn to all different sorts of brakes, and you kind of, I think you get used to it, but certain brakes kind of facilitate that window of delivering the power in a much broader sense. The one, we've got a cutaway here, this is a SRAM lever, so they use a thing called a swing link, and we'll show you some close-ups in a minute. It's like a cam, and so you can see that as the lever moves through, it changes the leverage of the brake, and then so as you get closer to the bar, it's biting harder. So then it means you can touch the brake a little bit and it will scrap a little bit. So it's just trying to give you a bit more control. So how is it controlled? Basically, there's different swing rates and leverages in the lever usually. Final questions for today is from Joey G333.
Good name.
Very good name. Who says, why don't the people doing the Megavalanche use fat bikes? They're great in snow and great on dirt and are proven to be capable. So the Megavalanche, in case it's escaped anyone, is a mass start. You can see Blake take it on and Hank from GCN take it on. Mass start downhill race in outdoors in the French Alps, where you start on a snowy glacier with hundreds of other people and all crash into each other and then race down some downhill tracks and some long hours, amount of time later, finish. So it's a good question, because I don't think I've ever seen anyone on a fat. I'm sure they must have done it, but why doesn't everyone do that?
That's a good question. I mean, I've got to say, Megavalanche terrifies me. There are these humongous downhill mass start events. Mega is obviously the best. And there's bikes named after it that are mega. So yeah, fat bikes. Fat bikes are awesome in really specific conditions. And the Megavalanches, yes, they do start on snow, but then they traverse all the way down the mountain. So it's 40 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes depending on how quick you are. So yeah, I think it would just be too compromised. Maybe if you could do a bike change, maybe this is something they can suggest, is that they do a fat bike bit at the start and then transfer. I guess the other thing is also the majority of fat bikes are hardtails. There are some suspension bikes out there for the humongous tyres. But yeah, I think it would just be too compromised and I mean, like, fat bikes are awesome. They're really, really good on the right terrains. They can work in steeper stuff as well. I just don't think they'd be that suited to the hugeness of the Megavalanche.
I suppose so. You're going to spend so much time racing down the downhill tracks.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like a dusty, or you know, if it's wet downhill track, but it's like a World Cup downhill track. So I guess it's a similar thing there in terms of there's not that many people running 3-inch, 4-inch tyres at World Cup downhills, because there's pedalling sections and all of that too.
I'd love to see it though. So if you want to go for it, Joey, send us in your clips and we'll review how well.
Do. I mean, this is where, in the comments, please add if you've seen somebody on a fat bike just slaying it. That'd be great.
That's all we've got time for today. So thank you, Owen, for educating me on stuff, and we will see you guys next time.
Don't forget to add your hashtag Ask GMBN Tech comments below.